What else? That is absolutely one, right? You want to make sure that they're secured. Otherwise, you're going to be in chief's office explaining what's going on. And then litigation. But what else? What about you?
Because that's their seatbelt.
Well, it's safety first of all, and it's bad practice not to do it, and it's very unprofessional showing up at the OEM.
Sure.
Yeah,
So
if you do it the right way every time, then you have nothing to worry about. If you start doing it the wrong way, then you'll start making bad habits.
Right.
Restrain their access from getting to you.
Yes, there we go. We're moving in a good direction, right? So think about it too, right? We sometimes have unpredictable patients, right? Sometimes we're questioning, what's going on. I trust nobody, right? So you need to make sure you do that. You have them appropriately secured. Probably you're gonna, if you have a few seconds to figure things out and get your wits about you. But let's kind of go along that path. Safety first, right? Your safety. What happens and what's going to kill you if you roll that, if your partner, something happens and heaven forbid, that ambulance gets crushed, gets rolled, turns over. What's going to kill you?
Projectile. Which in
Projectile?
this case could be the patient.
Right. If you don't have them appropriately secured in the back, right, they could kill you, right? You want to make sure that they're strapped in so they don't become a projectile, right? Not only for their safety, but for your safety. We do transports, and we do transport sometimes at higher speeds, right? Obviously, I come from Maine. We did a lot of transports down here to Boston, right? We're driving on the interstate. We're going at good speed. Always the speed limit, right? But we're doing a good clip down to the Boston hospitals. What happens if something happens? You guys going to be working in Everett, obviously, and you may not be going on listed long distance transfers, but you have something happen, you flip an ambulance, even going 20, 30, 40 miles an hour. You don't want that patient to be a projectile. It could kill you, could kill your partner, not only kill your patient, which obviously we're not trying to do, but also your safety. And that somebody else said, right, and I'll get on this soapbox for a minute, and I apologize, but that's the other thing, right, is making sure that other people, that if you got mom, I transported on Friday, I transported a 4-year-old. And when I transported that 4-year-old, mom came, right? Mom put on her seatbelt for me while we're transporting. And whenever I can, I try to buckle. I am not the best, but as a provider in the back, if there's not something that gets in my way to do that, it is best if I can secure myself. Again, so I don't kill my patient and become a projectile. Also, so hopefully I don't die if we were to get in an accident. It happens. Hopefully it never does, but there is that possibility. You look at some of the ambulances in Europe and some of the things that they're doing out there, they've really designed it that the person is fully harnessed the whole time and they can treat the patient fully with only reaching out for things. Here in the United States, we're still not there. We will be at some point, obviously, I think, as we continue to progress, but right now we're not there yet. Any questions as I continue to talk way too much here? All right. So another thing is backboards, right? You guys have gone over spinal, right? You've talked about backboards. What were backboards originally designed for?
ski slopes, mountains.
Close. Extrication, right? They're designed for extrication. You got somebody down an embankment, you got to get them up and moved, right? And then in the 60s, there was a retrospective study that went out there, right? And this is how EMS evolved, right? So in the 60s, there was a retrospective study saying that, 2 or 3 people should have been backboarded and weren't backboarded. And then all of a sudden it kind of spirals. And about 5-10 years, up until about 5 years ago, really in most states, you're strapping everybody to a backboard. Backboards are designed for an extrication device. They do very good for extrication. You're down in an embankment. You got to carry somebody around whatever, right? You got to carry them down a mountain, sure. They're an extrication device. They are not necessarily an immobilization or spinal motion device to carry somebody from a long distance, right? They're designed and built to bring them from one place to the next. They are beneficial, right? From time to time, if I'm in the back of the ambulance by myself, and am I always going to take them off the backboard? Not necessarily, right? I have an unstable patient. I'm stuck by myself, and it's just myself and my partner. I don't have somebody else to drive for me. I'm bringing that patient to the hospital, and I'm questioning whether or not they're going to have a stable airway, whether or not they could vomit. Well, if that's the case, and I'm trying to keep spinal motion restriction, and they're going to vomit on the way to the hospital, and I'm the only one in the back, I'm probably going to keep them on the backboard. I'm going to be able to effectively flip them up on their side, suction them out if I need to suction them out, but I'm going to be able to continue to keep them immobilized. Whereas if I didn't have that, I probably wouldn't be able to secure that airway and keep that airway. But really, a backboard is been designed, and it really is for transferring of patients. And we're moving away from saying that we always use them for spinal motion restriction or spinal immobilization. They are hard, they are flat. What is our spine? Is our spine flat?
Or
No,
It's got a small curve to it.
Yeah. You got your lordotic curve. You got your you got 4 different curves if you truly look at it, right? You have your cervical as it comes down. You got your thoracic, and then your thoracic goes into your lumbar. You have curvature in your spine. A backboard is not curved, right? And then you got little meme who has kyphosis or who's all hunkered down, who has that big hump on their back, right? And to put her on a backboard for an extended period of time is a travesty, because she has so much curvature that she's going to be super uncomfortable. Even if you put tons of pillows, even if you put padding, it's just not the best mode of transportation. So there are some services that actually have vacuum splints that will mold to the body that they use instead of backboards. Not many, but there are some, especially up in the north, where we're taking and bringing people long distances and those types of things. But it's really something to kind of think about, right? We used it all the time on a regular basis. We definitely use them still. And there are some very real indications to continue to use them, but we aren't necessarily putting every single spinal patient, everybody that we suspect of a spinal injury, to have that. It is very useful in some respects, but also it's a tool, and we don't use the same tool for every single job. All right. So, and again, awkward places, strapping them down is important as we go through, okay? When you move a patient, right, you want to make sure that you have a good control as far as what's going on. You want to make sure that you can move your patient appropriately. You want to work together as a team when you're doing that. A lot of times you'll see partners that work together. You're going to have your team that you work with. You're going to have your crew. You're going to have somebody that you work with on the ambulance on a regular time. You'll get to the point where you can just give them a look and you'll know what the plan is, right? But as you're getting to that, you want to make sure you communicate as much as you can. You want to make sure that you're ready to move them. It's number one, so you don't hurt your patient, but also so you don't get hurt as you're moving them as well. Proper mechanics, making sure that you have the proper mechanics as you move them, right? Everybody, when we first came up with self-loading stretchers and all the mechanical stretchers, they're all like, well, these going to end all back injuries. These going to stop people from getting hurt. There's some indication that some of this will be helpful, but the problem, right? Some of the issues that we have is that people are more sedentary. You are looking at your phone, you're watching TV, you're maybe not working out as much, you're not doing as much as you were, as a general consensus, right? So making sure that you have good physical fitness and that you maintain that physical fitness as you get on the trucks and you move is extremely important. Having the self-loading stretchers is great. It's going to help save your back in some respects, but it's not going to save your back from transitioning that patient from the stretcher to the hospital bed. transitioning that patient from the embankment up to the stretcher of the road where you can actually get to it, right? You're still going to have that strength. You're still going to have those body mechanics and that physical fitness to do the job. So that's one piece that we really need to be cognizant of as we continue to do that. Just think about as you kind of stand upright and as you move and in different things, really think about when you lift. What's one of the things that you hear as far as Bud's terms when you lift and those types of things? How do you want to do it?
Like lift with your left, not with your back.
Right. Really making sure you keep your core strong, lifting with your legs. That's going to keep you going, right? You continually bend over and lift with your back, you're going to be out soon, right? We know that our patients are not getting lighter every day, right? We're carrying heavier and heavier patients. On average, our society, our general population is heavier than it's ever been. So that increased weight happens, right? So we do need to make sure that we're using proper body mechanics, that we're also getting enough people to lift, right? Calling for a lift assist is not a bad thing. Take care of yourself and your partner and your patient. If you try to lift something that's too heavy, you're going to end up getting yourself hurt. When you're lifting here, okay, is this the correct way to lift?
No,
Why?
Back's not locked.
back's not locked and straight.
Right. So really where you would want to see him, right, is squatting down even further, lifting with the legs like we talked about. You guys are absolutely right. But really driving those heels through the ground, driving up with your quads and lifting there, keeping your back straight. Lifting like this on a regular basis is going to get you in trouble and you're not going to last as long. This, you know, lifting a patient who's 275 pounds plus a stretcher plus everything else, it's a good way for you to blow out your back pretty easily, right? Most of the injuries, when we think about it, if you lift while you're leaning forward, if you lift with your back straight, you want to make sure that you're significantly forward at the hips, okay? If you're off balance, if you're off footing, if you're bent over, you're gonna run into more problems. So really getting that good core, squatting down, lifting with your legs is really important. It's also going to give you a better lift, right? Not all partners are the same height, right? So you may have somebody who's a little bit vertically challenged. They're going to learn how to lift. They're going to be able to do their job, but they may have to stage, right? I've had some partners who were challenged height-wise, so they could lift, they could do their job no problem, but they may have to go up and then go up to the final loading height after that, after they change their grip. Whatever works, you just need to make sure that you're appropriately working with them for their body mechanics so they can do the right thing. When you think about it, good base, you know, feet about shoulder width apart. You think about it, it's when you're doing your squat, your deadlifts, you know, those types of things. You want to make sure that you have that. You want to be good at center of gravity. You want to make sure that you hold your back upright and bring your body down with bending your legs. Okay. Grasp the patient and stretcher. Some people are going to like over, some people are going to like under, some people are going to like split. That depends on you, your grip strength, and how comfortable you feel. But you got to have a good base. You got to bend down and you got to lift appropriately. And that goes for anything that you do. You guys are going to be moving, lifting, doing a lot of things, right? In the fire service, you guys are very active. I'm sure the academy is going to drill this into you literally over and over and over again. But even when, not only with the fire piece of it, but for the EMS piece, you can't let your guard down, because that's what's gonna keep you safe and gonna keep you working for a longer period of time. You wanna make sure you keep the weight close to your body. Keep your arms the same distance apart, right? And lift by raising your body and arms, straightening your legs until standing, right? You wanna pretty much drive your heels up through. You know, you wanna keep flat on your feet, but your power is going to come from keeping your weight and driving your heels down into the ground and lifting with your legs. That's where your power comes through. When you're thinking about other pieces, right? Some of our equipment makes things a little bit more challenging, right? A scoop stretcher, as you're lifting and moving with a scoop stretcher, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. You're going to have to lift and move and do those types of things. About 10 inches apart, when you go to lift, you want to make sure that your fingers are in the right, and you want to take and cradle with your palm. Easier said than done. On a level surface, that's great. When you're bringing somebody up an embankment, when you're dealing with a car that's rolled over, it can be very, very challenging. Keep yourself safe, go slow, and you'll get through it, right? Sometimes we may need to readjust the patient, right? We're not going to work a full code when nobody can even get around the patient. We may need to move them, right? We may need to drag them a little bit and move them into a better position. You want to make sure that you're keeping your core or your abdominal muscles, your thoracic area. You want to make sure that that's nice and tight. You don't want to overextend your reach. That's going to be problematic as you go through, right? Moving somebody out of the way so you can appropriately treat this patient is absolutely critical. We're working codes on scenes. Well, those scenes can be interesting. If it's a tiny bathroom, do we need to move them out of the bathroom so we can effectively run a code? Do we need to move them to a place that's safe? These are all things that we need to think about. From time to time, we may need to drag our patient. We may need to manipulate, move them to a better area that we can appropriately treat them to keep them alive, right? Dragging them across the bed. A lot of times we'll show up and somebody will be in the bed. Do we need to move them to the floor? Do we need to move them off of that and into a better place so we can actually treat them effectively? Running a code on the bed is not going to be possible. You're not going to have effective compressions. You're not going to be able to do that. So you're going to have to move them. Transferring that patient. The other piece is on every single transport, right? We bring them to a destination. If we're transporting the patient, where are we bringing them? We're bringing them to the hospital so we can give a report and move them where they need to go. That transfer of that patient into the hospital is important. Now we can adjust the stretcher height, we can adjust the bed height, we can move things around, but the hospital rooms aren't huge. They're small. Sometimes you may utilize their transfer devices and different things, but a lot of times we'll end up moving them. And when we do, we want to make sure that you're not overreaching, you have a good tight core, and you're using your mechanics to your advantage. The other thing, as you're thinking about it, right, is we do need to place patients on a backboard. We do need to put them on a scoop stretcher. We do need to move them all around and to manipulate them so we can get them where they need to go. So another piece of that is how do we take and move them? The log roll is an effective thing that we've done for an extended period of time. If we're truly trying to protect the spine, what is the best way to actually move a patient? Does anyone know?
With the KED?
No.
I'm sorry. Well,
You cut out there a little bit. So the question is so you have somebody with a compromised spine. You have a football player who went in, had his head down, and he's got a spinal injury. You're going to take him off the field. The log roll is one way to do it, but there's actually one that the studies are showing there's another way that's better. Does anyone know what that is? Do you guys talk about that at all?
No, we haven't. We just heard about the log roll.
Okay. So the another way to move a patient is the 4+, 6+ person lift. So you're actually lifting and elevating that person and then sliding the backboard underneath. If you truly have a spinal injury, if you got somebody that you're doing that, it is a more effective way than log rolling them and putting them onto a backboard. You'll see, but sometimes it's you and your partner. it's you, your partner, and the police. You haven't got 5, 6, 7 people to really move them, lift them, elevate them, that know what's going on. So it may not be the best option. Scoop stretcher is very effective as well. So we'll go over that probably today. I don't know what's on Tommy's agenda, but we can break one out today, and you guys can try the scoop stretcher. You can try the backboard and those types of things as we go through, and then just get used to them. They are tools that we have, and some instances that's what's going to be best for the patient at that point. When we're log rolling, things to think about: you want to keep your back straight. You are reaching and stuff, so if you're pulling them, you got to be careful. We'll go over this a lot more when we kind of go through it later on this afternoon, or I'll talk to whoever that's working with you this afternoon. You know, think about when we're lifting, carrying, and we're doing that. You may need to estimate what is the patient's weight. You know, the average weight 120 to 220. I would say that's even more now, right? The average weight patient that you're going to be transporting is going to be probably more than that. So think about how many people you need for a certain thing. There are some companies that have, you know, if they're over 275, you got to call for a lift assist. There are some stipulations and some policies on that just to protect individuals. So think about what you can safely move, lift, and carry. And think about the situation. Now, sometimes I got little MMA who's 100 pounds soaking wet, but she's in a predicament that is, you know, a really tough spot to kind of move her. I may need more lifting help, even though it's a lightweight person. But if they're in a tight space, if they're in a place that we really can't get good mechanics, we may need to actually take and move that a little bit differently. You know, 250 pounds is a generic. They talk about that. And really the guideline, 250 pounds with fewer than 4 people is not recommended. And most companies may, or services or municipalities may have something. Some do, some don't. I know of a few that actually have some policies that if it's 250 pounds or more, they're calling for some extra help. When we're looking at bariatric, special bariatric equipment, 350 pounds. A lot of the self-loading stretchers now can carry up to 650 pretty easily. What we find with bariatric patients and people over 350 pounds sometimes is that they're not 350 pounds because they're so tall or anything like that. They may be really short, but still 350 pounds. So the girth and the measurements from around can be very challenging. So are they even going to fit on your stretcher? That's the question. You can have somebody who's really a tall individual that carries a ton of weight that can fit better on the stretcher than somebody who may weigh less, but because they're so short in stature, their circumference is much more. So it's going to be much more difficult to get them actually strapped on your stretcher. So think about somebody, and that's when you go on scene, you need to start thinking about that. How are we going to get this patient out? Right? A lot of times I'll go, and if it's a sick patient, you know, I'm on PB, so it's you and you're a basic EMT, and you and I are working together, and it's a sick patient that I got to take and do some stuff for. A lot of times I'll look at my partner and be like, okay, I'm going to start patient care. We're going to start going through. Get me an extra strategy and get me the hell out of here. You know, how are we going to move this patient? You need to start thinking, do you need to call for assistance? Is it somebody? The record largest patient I've ever had to deal with was 750 pounds. This patient was so big that we couldn't actually get them out the door. They actually had to cut the side of the house off, and it was always not the first floor. They actually had to call ladders, a ladder truck from a few places over that could sustain that amount of weight to get them out the outside of the side of the house. This individual hadn't left the house in years, many years, and was unable to actually get them out of the house. So, and that's not the only one, right? And we know that our population is growing, literally, and as that happens, think about extrication. How are we going to get them out? Do we have enough with just the two of us, or are we going to have to call for, and I don't know. Are you guys responding with an engine on every call? Do you guys know yet?
No, we haven't been given all the logistics of everything.
Yeah, neither have I. But a lot of times fire departments may respond with an engine and an ambulance. But that's not always going to be the case. They could be tied up. They could be whatever. So think about what you have for resources, what makes sense, or do you need to call? You know, we in EMS, we can do pretty much everything the hospital can do in a code, right? We can run through everything that we need. So if that's the case and we need to treat the patient there for a few extra minutes so we can safely get them out of the house, then we need to do that and then call for the appropriate resources. One of the big pet peeves, and I've actually seen people kill their patient, right? You got to have somebody focus on that, especially when we have obese patients. You know, sometimes you get so worked up and how are we going to get this patient out? How are we going to get them from into the back of the ambulance? And it's troublesome, right? It's going to be really hard work to get them out. And then the providers focus just on that. Well, you still got a sick patient. You can't let them code. You can't lay them down flat and you have an obese patient. And then all that weight is going to be on their chest. So now their respiratory decreases. It decreases to the point where they're going to end up going in cardiac arrest. And now you're working a code in the middle of the stairway, right? So don't forget that you really want to assign somebody, say, okay, you're going to take and you're going to follow up with that patient. You're going to be in charge of patient care. You're in charge of patient care. And then everybody else. I like to, you know, either it's myself or my partner, one of us who's going to be writing that run sheet, who's going to be doing that patient care. If I got another medic, or if it's not something that I have to step in with my medic stuff, my BLS partner is going to be taking care of that patient. They'll take care of the patient. I'll take care of everything else. So make sure that if you're doing that, you kind of work together. That's the best part about EMS, is that you have partners. And it's going to be really important to develop those relationships and understandings of who does what and how you do that. Lifting and carrying, when we're thinking about moving that, right? Whether or not it's a diamond carry, you got two on the side, one in front and back, you know, depending on where you're going and how you're doing that. This is great, but does this work everywhere?
No, definitely not.
Yeah, think about the house that you're in, right? Think about walking out. Are you going to be able to do this? And I'm not the smallest individual, right? So are you even going to be able to fit and do outside? Sure, that works great. But realistically, in the homes that you're going to be carrying people out of, does this work best? Not all the time. So obviously this would be the best if you can move in that direction, but just realize you may need to improvise. And sometimes the person at the head and the foot have all the weight. Stair chairs, right? Stair chairs can be great, but you know, they can also be problematic, right? This one here has easy glide tracks. A lot of them have that. You'll notice at Cataldo, there's a ton of out there that we just still are using the maroon small simple ones, which you'll get to use one here, right? No tracks, so you're gonna have to carry that weight. The track ones are nice. They don't work well with some of the, they sometimes can be a little bit troublesome as you're going down a curved or a circular stairway, or something with some different breaks and turns. So sometimes it can be a little bit more. They're heavier than the aluminum ones that we typically carry at Cataldo. So they're a bit heavier, but those tracks really, once you engage the tracks, it makes things super easy. But you're still gonna have to carry that weight. You're still gonna have to take and maneuver that patient appropriately. You're still gonna have to secure your patient into the stair chair. Now, when would this stair chair not be appropriate? Let's say we have somebody on the 4th floor. When would we use the stair chair, and when wouldn't we use the stair chair? There's no elevator, it's broken. So now we got 4 flights of stairs to take care of our patient. What are some things that you're thinking of as an EMT?
I mean, I'd imagine that the weight of the patient would have some contraindications. Like if they're 750 pounds, would that even hold them?
Absolutely. You got to know what your device will carry. Great point. So let's say that we have somebody that's 300 pounds. So 300-pound patient, got to bring them down 4 flights of stairs. What are some things you're thinking about? When would the stair chair be appropriate and when would the stair chair not be appropriate? You see it right there on this sheet, right? They got to be conscious, right? You got to be able to sit them up. Obviously, if they're unconscious, if they are, if they have altered mental status to the point that they can't sit up, should we have them in the stair chair or should we be carrying them down via Titan tarp or backboard or scoop stretcher or all of the above? Should we be carrying them different or have them in a different position? Not everybody will be able to sit in a stair chair. Maybe they've had hip surgery, maybe they've had knee surgery, so they can't actually sit in the stair chair appropriately. So we can't actually utilize that. So then you're going to have to go to plan B. You're going to have to figure out a different way to get them down safely. And it's going to be a lot of work. And you're probably going to have to call for a lot of help, right? Moving a patient, and you see this in mountain rescues, right? They have hundreds of people to move somebody just a short distance. Carrying somebody fully and all of that weight through some challenging terrain or over other things takes a ton of people. Even a 4-story house that you have to carry somebody out, that's going to take some time. And you're going to have to help out, and you're going to have to take and probably use more than just a couple folks. I think we sometimes don't do that, and you got EMS providers carrying somebody down all the way by themselves, and that can be problematic, right? Increased risk of injury to you, to your partner, to the patient as well, because if you drop them or something happens, it's going to be problematic as well. You really, when you're putting them into any carrying device and moving them, you really need to be careful with moving that back, whether or not it's backboard, whether or not it's a stretcher, those types of things. How are we going to manipulate and move them appropriately? We're not bringing stretcher into a house typically where we got a ton of stairs to go up and down, because you're not going to take that 100 and some odd pound, 90-pound stretcher and then also carry that up and down with your 200 or 300-pound patient. That can turn into a whole lot of weight really quickly. So you got to think about where you're going to bring them, where are you going to leave the stretcher, how are you going to set things up, and how are you going to get them from their bedroom to the stretcher, whether or not a stair chair or Titan tarp or backboard or scoop stretcher. All of these are tools that you're going to have to be comfortable with and to move them. This is an automatic stretcher. I don't know if it's self-loader, but it's definitely an automatic up and down. Actually, this is probably a self-loader as well. This is one of the Strykers. Great unit, but it does weigh quite a bit of weight. It does have quite a bit of weight. Regardless if you're using an automatic stretcher, you want to make sure you have somebody at the head, the foot, to appropriately move the patient. If there's some malfunction, if something happens, you want to make sure that somebody's there to keep the patient safe. The side rails on this is that they're actually kind of nice. You can actually lay them down. So if you get somebody who's very wide, they actually can take and support a little bit. Notice that the shoulder straps are on, that the feet and the hips and all those types of things. When you go through doors, when you're moving a patient, just make sure that they don't throw their arms out. You don't want to break their wrist. You don't want to break their arm or anything like that. The self-loading stretchers, like I said, you're seeing more and more. I don't know what you guys are going to have. Probably you'll end up having a self-loading stretcher. If not, then you'll have at least something that goes in the new KKK standards for ambulance and security ambulance. Typically is going away from the basket loaders that you'll see. We're slowly getting rid of them and going to a stat track or going to a different securing mechanism, because when you do a rollover, those baskets aren't going to hold those stretchers. So the standards are forcing services to kind of move in a different direction. Not there yet, but we are moving in that direction where you're going to see the loading devices and the stretchers continue to move forward. Anything that we do when we're moving, lifting, changing patients and changing them from one to the next, if you're bringing them outside, if you're doing that, you got to have effective communication. You got to have somebody willing to take and step up and move forward. Typically, it's whoever's in charge of patient care or whoever's leading that team to get them out. Like I said earlier, a lot of times, depending if I got to take care of the patient and do patient care, that's what I'm going to do. I'll say I'll stop and I'll do that. But if it's a critically sick patient, I'm going to do that. And I'm going to tell my partner, get us out of here. Find a means of egress and let's go. And then I'll let them coordinate that. We're a team, and that's going to be as important. You're going to have a fire structure. You may work together a little bit differently as you guys continue to progress. I'm not sure, you know, if there's an engine there and you get a lieutenant or somebody else, you know, maybe they help manage and do the scene, you do the patient care. I'm not sure what your structure is going to look like, but regardless, you're going to have a coordinated event to do that, to keep you safe and to keep your patient safe as well. You know, team leader, you know, is everybody ready? Are we going to move? Countdowns are also used. So we'll play around with that today. Regardless, I'll figure out whoever's going to be working with you guys this afternoon. But as we work with you this afternoon, you're going to have to coordinate it. And you can play around with that and figure out what works, what doesn't work. Won't drop anyone on purpose today, but you know, it happens. At some point, perhaps we have to do an emergency move. You will be all firemen. You may have to do an emergency move. You may show up and you may have somebody in a car. You may have somebody in a house that's burning. Well, you're not going to worry about X, Y, and Z. You're going to get them out, right? There's potential for danger. You're going into those burning buildings. I'm not. You are. And when you take and grab them and take them out, you may have to close drag. You may have to blanket, arm carry, do whatever. And again, the academy, as you go through, they're going to show you a ton of these things. You're going to be very effective in doing that. But think about, as you're taking care of your patient, different carries as you get them out, you're going to have to do what you need to do. And again, this is only in an emergency, in the sense of getting them out of the building, getting them out of the car, moving them from one spot to the next to make sure that they're safe, so you can effectively work with them, but also work with them in a safe place. So those emergency moves, take a look at them. It's important, but you're going to get a lot more practice with that as you go through academy, as you work on dropping down fires and pulling people out of buildings and doing all the things that you guys do. Getting people out of cars can be challenging. And again, typically, you know, back in the day when I walked both ways to schools, no. But if you think about how we used to move patients out of vehicles 10 years ago compared to what we do today, is drastically different, right? But the emergency moves and those types of things, we still do the same thing, right? If it's an unstable car, if it's an unstable scene, if you're able to get in there safely to get that person out, you're going to move them, right? You're not going to do this if you're in a stable area. You're going to do X, Y, and Z. You're going to put on a collar. You're going to get them out of the car safely. We used to put them in a KED. You get tested on the KED, but practice-wise, we don't do that quite as much anymore, because they've done the studies showing that a KED is not as effective for spinal motion restriction as actually putting on a collar and moving a patient. That being said, if it's a critical scene, those types of things, we may need to do things differently. You still get tested on KED. It's still a means of utilizing and doing that. But nationally, over the past few years, Massachusetts a little bit slower than other places, but Maine was one of the first ones to really do spinal rule out, to do spinal motion restriction in the sense of stabilizing them to the stretcher versus backboard, but also when we get them out of the vehicle, how to do that appropriately. And throwing KED on is not always the case. You have to be efficient because OEMS and the test, you have to be able to do that. But at the same time, you're probably not going to see that in practice as much anymore. So urgent moves, altered mental status, right? Inability to ventilate, in shock, extreme weather conditions, all these types of things you're going to have to take and do an urgent move. You're going to have to get them out of there, right? Altered level of consciousness, and they're not breathing. You need to be able to breathe for them. Well, you're not going to be able to do that effectively in the car or in certain areas, so you may need to move them. Rapid extrication, where they're going to be moved within a minute or so, you may need to be able, oops, kind of go a little bit happy on that one, but you may need to take and move them, okay? There's potential risk of injuries. You want to minimize that the best you can, but at the same time, if you don't move them, they're going to be dead. So it's a lesser of two evils, okay? Any questions on that stuff? Pretty straightforward, not rocket science, right? Non-urgent moves, things slow down, patient stable. Take your time, go through. Everybody's got a camera. Everybody's, you know, you see dollar signs on the patient's eyes. You know, they got, you know, they got an fender bender and they're saying they got back pain. Do they have back pain? Don't they have back pain? I don't care, but I'm going to treat my patient. And if they're non-urgent, they're stable, we can do that. We're going to slow down. We're going to move them. We're make sure we have spinal motion restriction, go through all the paces. And that's what's best. But sometimes they don't have an airway. Sometimes they aren't breathing. Sometimes they're altered. That's where we have to move a little bit faster. And you guys will figure that out as you move forward too. Extremity lift, direct ground lift, these are all pieces you can kind of, you'll get to see and move. Transfer moves, direct carry, sheet method, scoop stretcher. We use scoop stretcher. We use the Titan tarp typically when we move people. You know, get them hooked up, get them on the Titan tarp, move them appropriately. Those are all ones that we'll typically do. Sometimes you have to use the sheet. Sometimes sometimes you got to make a quick move, but non-urgent, we want to make sure that we put them on the appropriate device. We move them appropriately as we go through the process. Question? Okay. So as we talked about earlier, right? Little MMA with kyphosis like this, you know, think about throwing her on the backboard. How detrimental is that going to be? Extreme curvatures, what's that?
I'm saying the flex stretcher,
Yeah.
if that's used regularly in practice, because I mean, would that work for somebody like that?
Could be. You know, sometimes you'll use a non-rigid, or you got to pad the heck out of it, right?
Right. Okay.
But a stretcher is going to be much better than a backboard. Think about trying to put this on a backboard like we had to do 10 years ago. Everybody had to go on a backboard. It was awful. So, you know, think about how we're going to position them. We also know, and the reason why backboards aren't used as frequently as they did, right? We also know with the geriatric patient, their skin breaks down in 20 to 30 minutes. So you take Meme or Papa and throw them on the backboard, and we transport them to the hospital, and they're on there for 30 minutes or so. They can have skin breakdown. They can actually have detriment to their skin and get a skin lesion, which then can turn into an infection as well. So we're actually could physically harm our patient by keeping them on the backboard for too long versus taking care of them. So things to kind of think about. Bariatrics, we kind of alluded to earlier, right? Obese, our patients are obese. 30 to 40%, 76 million US adults are obese. 30 to 40% of adults are obese. I'm obese, according to my doctor, right? And if you look at it, your class, even though you guys are fit and you're ready for academy, you're probably in very good shape. Technically, according to some of these standards, right, you're probably obese because you are a certain height and you're a certain weight. So I take that with it, you know, this number is whatever, but at the same time, we do have a lot heavier patients. We do have more and more doing that. We know that our children are heavier than they've ever been. They sit all day working on their computers in school, right? They're not moving, they're not doing as much. So we do have larger and larger people in our society, especially in the US. So back injuries also can be one of the largest number of missed days of work. We know even here at Cataldo, our biggest missed days of work is a back injury still, right? Stretchers, equipment, those types of things. This is a picture here of a bariatric stretcher. It has a larger wheelbase, has the handles here. The stretcher itself is wider. So I've seen these that are nice and wide and actually will have ramps that go down. Not every service has these, so sometimes you're calling for another service that has a bariatric stretcher. One of the services I work for up north, we have 2 different bariatric stretchers, and sometimes the fire departments and others nearby towns will call us because we do have the bariatric stretchers, just because they have a patient that's larger that needs that. When we're thinking about the pneumatic, the hydraulic stretchers, the electronic ones that we use, they're awesome. They do way more, right? But so you need to be cognizant of that. Not only do they go up and down by themselves, but now we have the self-loaders where we click them in the back of the ambulance and it actually will lift and load and do all of that. They can go up to 650 pounds easily. But when they, if they were to have a failure, you need to be able to do that, which can be a little bit more challenging. Portable stretcher, we use the Titan tarp here. I don't use the portable stretcher. We use Reeve sleeves, Titan tarps. We move them down. We may use a backboard. We may use a scoop stretcher, but the Titan tarp works quite well for really moving them. As far as this fabric, old school portable stretcher, we don't use as much, at least pre-hospitally here in Massachusetts. I don't see it as much. And then of course you may have some flexible things. When you go to the fire department and you're doing high angle rescue, you're doing the other things. When you're in that rescue mode, you may have a Stoke stretcher. You may have other things that you're utilizing when you're doing confined spaces, when you're doing other things as well. So these are all pieces. When we talk about short backboards and different things like that, the KED is one of the things. You're going to have to learn this for OEMS. We don't use this as much as we used to, but this is something that you have to become an EMT. But it is one thing that we used to use quite a bit. I'll finish this piece and then I haven't given them a break yet. So, okay, thank you. So the KED, the short moving devices, those types of things are all important as well. Vacuum mattresses, we kind of talked about. For vacuum mattresses, there are some services that will utilize vacuum mattresses where basically it just has a bunch of like little beads and they're very effective, but they take up a lot of room in the truck. There are some actually folks who respond to a lot of the ski mountains in Maine have the vacuum mattresses because they're taking a potential spinal injury patient on some fantastic roads for an extended period of time. So they're very effective. They work well, but they do take up some space and they do take some time to figure out how to use them. Stoke stretcher, rigid basket stretchers, which I kind of alluded to. We're not going to spend a ton of time, but those are pieces. Scoop stretchers, you'll get to learn those. You should at least get your hands on that today as you kind of go through the process. One of the big things which I talked about too, decontamination. Clean your stretcher, clean your devices. I do not want any of my family getting on something that hasn't been cleaned. So make sure you decontaminate it, stop the spread of disease, those types of things. Patient positioning, make sure that they're safe, make sure they're in a patient of comfort. A lot of times we'll transport a patient in a Fowler position or semi-Fowler position. So they're prone or they're, not prone, sorry, supine, but they're laying face up, or they may be bent in like more of a sitting position, or they may be at a like a 45-degree angle versus a straight 90-degree angle. Any questions on these? We talked about restraints. I'm flipping through because I've already talked about a lot of these different types of things. And that should be about it. Any questions, problems, concerns? All right, so let's go ahead. I talked quite a bit here for a couple of minutes. If there's no questions, let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. or we'll take a 13-minute break, right? So come, make sure you're back and ready to go at 10 past the hour. And Mark will take you through the next pieces. Thanks for listening. Sorry to drone out and to go through, but hopefully that was a little bit helpful, and I'll see you guys this afternoon.
Thanks very much.
Awesome, thank you.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, everyone, good morning. This is going to be our last discussion point for today. Dennis had to switch off for another training, so I'm going to go through transport ops with you today. I'm Mark. Transport operations really isn't all that sexy. I'm going to try my best to make our way through it. All right, so some of the things that you're going to find in the ambulance itself, there's going to be a lot of medical equipment. There's going to be a lot of devices for lifting and moving patients, which Dennis talked to you about earlier this morning. Going to have standard medical supplies, and in the ALS trucks, there's a lot of state-of-the-art technology. As far as the BLS trucks, pretty standard setup across the board. The way the ambulances are set up is basically so anybody that works for basically any company could jump into anybody's ambulance and kind of take off and do patient care. As part of that patient care that that we're doing in the back of the truck, unfortunately, the ambulance itself, with the emphasis being on rapid transport and rapid responses, that's going to place the EMT at a greater risk of danger while responding to the call and while transporting the patient. So we know that an ambulance is a vehicle that's used for treating and transporting patients who need emergency medical care to a hospital. The ambulance design actually came about in 1917, the standard for automotive ambulances. And there's been some suggestions from the ambulance industry as well as EMS personnel. Horse-drawn ambulances were used in major cities throughout the United States during the 1800s. A perfect example of this is Mass General Hospital. If you walk into the lobby at the General, there is a horse-drawn cart in the lobby. Mass General was one of the first hospitals to have a transporting ambulance service. As we take a look at the ambulance design, there are some components of the ambulance that we're going to take a look at. In the driver's compartment, pretty much the same as the cab in your car or in your truck. In the patient compartment, it's big enough for 2 EMTs and 1 patient on the stretcher. We do have another seating position. If we had to transport multiple patients, we could transport the patient secured to the bench seat as well on a long backboard or on a scoop stretcher. The equipment and supplies that are in the back of the truck are there to provide emergency medical care at the scene and during the transport, as well as to safeguard personnel and patients from any hazardous conditions. We do have some light extrication equipment in the ambulance. We basically have a hacksaw, a screwdriver, and a hammer. None of that is really going to be helpful if you're trying to extricate a patient. So generally what we do is we just wait for fire. The patient compartment of the in the truck is also equipped with two-way radio communication, and that radio on the back of the truck is used for contacting medical control should we need to get any orders, and also for contacting the hospital to let them know that we're coming in with a patient. When we talk about ambulance design, there are 3 different types of ambulances. A type 1 ambulance is the conventional truck cab chassis with a modular ambulance body that can be transferred to a newer chassis as needed. A type 2 is the standard van. Usually in the type 2s, this is where you find the BLS providers. The type 3s are a specialty van cab with a modular ambulance body that's mounted on a cutaway van chassis. So at Cataldo, we have the type 2 vehicles and we have the type 3s. Type 1s, these are usually what you see fire departments or specialty care transport like MedFlight operating. You see more of the type 1s. With the fire departments, Children's Hospital has a type 1 and Boston MedFlight has type 1s. In the United States, we know that it's an ambulance because it has the Star of Life on it. And that ambulance licensing or ambulance certification standard is established by each individual state. So here's our 3 different types of ambulances. In A, that's type 1, B is the type 2, and then C is a type 3. As we're making our way through the ambulance call, there's actually 9 phases of the call that we're going to go through. We're going to talk about each of the 9 phases of the call, starting with the preparation phase. During the preparation phase, this is when you come in to shift in the morning and you check out your truck to make sure that you have all of your equipment and all of your supplies. You're making sure that everything, not only is the equipment there, but also making sure that the equipment is ready for use. No matter which vehicle that you get into, they are all going to have the same equipment, and standardized equipment is across the board. So you can go into any truck at any base, and the trucks are going to be set up exactly the same with a little bit of variation. The way the trucks are set up, the equipment and supplies in the ambulance are set up according to how urgently and how often they're used. So if you're in the back of the truck and you're looking at the head of the stretcher, all the airway equipment is going to be closest to the head of the stretcher. Toward the middle of the stretcher in the cabinets is where your diagnostic equipment is going to be. And then further away at the foot of the stretcher is going to be your trauma supplies, your bulky dressings, burn sheets, and the OB kit. All the cabinets are plexiglass, so you can see right through. And usually everything is labeled. OEMS is the governing body for pre-hospital care, so the Office of Emergency Medical Services. They're actually the ones that determine the PAR levels for equipment in the ambulances. So according to the state, you are required to have 25 Band-Aids. When the state comes and does vehicle inspections, they will count to make sure that there are 25 Band-Aids in that cabinet. So our medical equipment, we're basically checking to make sure that we have personal protective equipment. We have gloves, we have gowns, and we have sharps containers. Airway and ventilation equipment, at least at a minimum 2 adult non-rebreathers and 2 adult nasal cannulas, 1 adult BVM, 1 child, and 1 infant BVM in the cabinets. Our basic wound care supplies are 4x4s, 5x9s, tape, and cling. Splinting supplies, an OB kit, a defib, suction. Our splinting, childbirth supplies, AED, all that, everything needs to not only be present, but we have to inspect it to make sure that it's not expired. At the beginning of the shift, you're going to check the stretcher, make sure that all your straps are on the stretcher, make sure that the stretcher works properly. You don't want to go to your first call and then find out that the stretcher is broken and you're not able to transfer the patient. Some other patient transfer equipment, you should have a long backboard and a scoop stretcher. And under the bench seat, check to make sure that you have a Titan tarp or just a regular tarp. That's another example of a patient transfer device. Your jump kit is also known as your 5-minute kit. And inside that jump kit is going to be all of the equipment that you're going to need in the first 5 minutes for the patient, with the exception of the AED. Usually in the front cab is where you'll have your personal safety equipment, such as the reflective vest. Those are usually rolled up in the driver's side and passenger side door of the front cab. In the front cab, there'll be 1 fire extinguisher, and in the patient compartment, there'll be another fire extinguisher. They're both 5-pound ABC dry chemical extinguishers. In the patient compartment, either under the bench seat or hanging up in the back, there'll be hard hats or helmets with safety goggles as well. As far as standard equipment in the ambulance, GPS and mobile data terminals are standard in the ambulances now. You will still find street maps in the driver's compartment. We have very little extrication equipment. Like I said earlier, it's a hammer, a screwdriver, and a hacksaw. It's only for simple light extrication. Staffing ratios are set by the state. At a minimum, it's 1 EMT and 1 first responder. That came about last year during COVID. The only service that's using a first responder driver and an EMT is Brewster. And they're only doing that for hospital transfers, not for 911. But at a minimum, in Massachusetts, under normal circumstances, the minimum staffing is 1 EMT in the patient compartment during transport and 1 EMT driver. At the paramedic level, minimum staffing is 1 EMT driver and 1 paramedic taking care of the patient, depending on the patient's level of care. Every day when you come in for shift, you are expected to perform a light daily inspection of the ambulance. You're checking to make sure that you have fuel, make sure that you have oil and antifreeze. Everything else, fleet takes care of. The last part of your ambulance checkout is going to be making sure that all of your equipment is secured. So your oxygen tanks are in the holders correctly. All equipment in the cab and in the patient compartment is strapped down or tied down and secured appropriately. We don't want anything flying around loose. In the event of an accident, anything that's not held down is going to become a projectile and could cause injury to not only the provider, but the patient as well. So now that we finished checking out the truck, we're now ready for our first call. So the second phase is the dispatch phase. So depending on what service area you're in, what city or community, when you dial 911 in Everett, it goes to the communication center for Everett Police and Fire. If you say that you need an ambulance, they transfer the call to Cataldo, and Cataldo will EMD the call. So this is a service that's available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. As the call taker is on the line, the dispatcher is finding out the nature of the call, the caller's name, their location, and a callback number, where the patient is located, how many patients there are, and any other pertinent information related to the patient's complaint. Then the dispatcher is going to assign that call to the closest, most appropriate unit, and they're going to drop the call on the closest truck, and they're going to respond. During the response phase, when the EMTs are responding to the scene, this is the most dangerous phase of the call for providers. If the ambulance gets in a crash, it can cause a lot of serious injuries. So to try to mitigate some of the danger, make sure that you have your seatbelts fastened before you're moving the ambulance. Dispatch information will pop up in the mobile data terminal. We use software called Navigator that will give dispatch comments. It will give you the nature of injury, nature of illness, and any notes that the call taker took. So you can review that dispatch information on the way to the call. And then as you're reviewing that dispatch information, you're going to start to form a mental picture of what it is exactly that you're going to be going in for. This is also a good time to start thinking about what equipment am I going to need to bring in based on the information that you've been given by the dispatcher. Once you arrive on scene, look around for any safety hazards that could harm you, your partner, bystanders, or the patient. Evaluate the need for additional ambulances or any other additional assistance. So if you have a 400-pound patient and they're on the 3rd floor and you're going to have to carry them down, you may need fire, you may need another ambulance. Try to determine mechanism of injury. Do I have a trauma patient or the nature of illness? Do I have a medical patient or do I have both? And then throughout all the phases of the call, we're going to be following standard precautions. If you're walking into what appears to be a mass casualty incident, you want to try to estimate the total number of patients and then communicate that to the incident commander. And then any additional resources that you're going to need will be coordinated through dispatch. If you arrive on scene of a motor vehicle accident, before you get out of the ambulance, put on your reflective vest and take into account a good parking spot, because you want to allow efficient traffic flow and control around the emergency scene. So if you are first to arrive, you want to park 100 feet behind the motor vehicle accident. If you are late to the party and you're the second responding unit on scene, you want to park 100 feet in front of the motor vehicle accident. And the reason we're doing that strategic parking is to allow efficient traffic flow around the emergency scene and to make sure that the ambulance doesn't get blocked in. If you see any signs of smoke, or if you know it's a hazardous material situation, you want to park uphill and upwind, and make sure you leave your emergency lights on. So here's safe parking distances for the ambulance on scene of a motor vehicle collision. As you can see in this figure, the fire truck is serving as our buffer. Creating a safe area for the EMTs to work. While you're wearing your EMT hat, you want to stay away from fires, explosive hazards, downed wires, and unstable structures. It sounds kind of funny to mention, but set the parking brake, set the e-brake in the ambulance. That's going to do two things. Number one, it's going to keep the ambulance from rolling away. And number two, when you pull the e-brake and set the e-brake, that kicks the engine into high idle. If you have your emergency lights on, the air conditioner in the patient compartment, the lights in the patient compartment, all that's going to draw power off the battery. So if the truck is parked on scene and you have all that energy being used, if you don't set the e-brake, you're going to go to put the truck in drive and then the truck's going to die. So set the e-brake and it's going to shift the engine into high idle, and it's going to keep those batteries charged. And it will also keep the HVAC system running smoothly. It's not the EMT's job to provide traffic control. That's what police are for. The only thing that we need to be cognizant of is not walking out into the middle of the street, assuming that other drivers are going to see us. So you want to approach each scene safely. We don't want to be out there directing traffic. That's what police get paid for. The next phase is going to be the transfer phase. This is when we're getting the patient packaged for transport. So whatever device it is that we're going to use to get the patient from point A to point B, let's say the patient's on the ground and they're unconscious, unresponsive, we could throw a scoop stretcher under them, pick them up on the scoop stretcher, and then put them down on the ambulance stretcher, and then remove the scoop, secure the patient to the wheeled stretcher, and then we lift them into the patient compartment and secure the stretcher in the back of the truck. Now we're in the transport phase, and this is when we're completing our assessment. When we're ready to leave with the patient, the driver is going to tell the dispatcher how many patients they're transporting and to what hospital. We don't have to tell the dispatcher the beginning mileage. We enter that into the patient care report ourselves. So as we're transporting the patient to the hospital, this is where we would complete our secondary assessment. If they are stable, we'll check in on them every 15 minutes. We'll reassess their vital signs. If they are unstable, we'll reassess every 3 to 5 minutes. You'll call the receiving facility, either on the radio or from your cell phone, and just give them a courtesy heads up that you're coming in with a patient and what's wrong with the patient. So now that you've arrived at the hospital, this is what's known as the delivery phase. This is when the driver notifies dispatch of the arrival at the hospital. You go into triage and you give your report to the triage nurse, and then you perform the physical transfer of the patient, where you take them off the ambulance stretcher and put them on the hospital stretcher. You'll give your verbal report to the nurse that's going to take care of the patient, and then you'll complete your electronic patient care report. We don't restock or exchange from the hospitals for medical equipment and supplies. The only thing that we exchange is linen. So you'll take your sheet off the stretcher and grab a new sheet on your way out. After you've dropped off your patient and you've given report and transferred care, now you would let dispatch know that you're clear of the hospital. And if you need to go back to the station, if you need to go back to the station for supplies, you will let dispatch know. Or if you're going to be out of service because the truck needs to be decontaminated. If you need to refuel, this would be done in the post-run phase if you weren't able to do it in the pre-trip phase when you checked out your truck. If you're going to be out of service because you need to decon the vehicle, there are some key terms. When you're cleaning the truck, that's just the process of removing dirt, dust, blood, or any other visible contaminants from surfaces or equipment. Disinfection is the killing of pathogenic agents by directly applying a chemical made for that purpose to the surface or the equipment. High-level disinfection is the killing of pathogenic agents by the use of a potent means of disinfection. And then finally, sterilization is the process that uses heat, and that's going to remove all microbial contamination. All the equipment that's in the truck, with the exception of, the stretcher, backboards, things like that, all the equipment is single-use disposable. So we're not really sterilizing anything. Everything that we use in the pre-hospital environment is a one and done. We throw it away. After each call, we're going to strip the stretcher. We'll throw that sheet in the blue bags at the hospital. We'll wipe down the stretcher mattress and any points of touch on the stretcher that the patient may have touched with a disinfectant wipe, and we'll let that air dry and put a new clean sheet on the stretcher. Now it's ready for the next patient. If you have any biohazard waste or just any general trash, biohazard waste is anything that's heavily soiled in blood or body fluids. That goes in a red bag at the hospital. General trash, dressings, bandages, or packages, that can just go in the regular trash. If there's any contaminated areas, you're going to wash those with soap and water first, and then you'll use your disinfectant and clean it again a second time. We're not so much using bleach anymore to clean the stretcher and clean the ambulance. We can use the purple top wipes, the Sani wipes, or another hospital grade disinfectant. But all non-disposable equipment that was used for patient care is going to be cleaned and disinfected
as needed when you use it. When you guys come through orientation with us, we're going to put you through EVOS, which is Emergency Vehicle Operator Safety. And that's a training course that's going to teach you defensive ambulance driving techniques. If the ambulance gets in a crash, it's going to delay patient care, or it could take the lives of the EMTs, other motorists, or pedestrians. So we're going to put you through a certified defensive driving program before you get out there to operate the emergency vehicle. Physical fitness and alertness are necessary to properly operate an emergency vehicle. So you shouldn't be driving if you take medications that can cause drowsiness or slow your reaction time, if you've been drinking alcohol, or if you've been working long shifts or multiple consecutive shifts. If you are operating the ambulance with lights and sirens, you do have the ability to go through a red light, drive on the opposite side of the road, go the wrong way down a one-way street, but you have to operate the emergency vehicle with the due regard for the life, safety, and property of others. So we can take a look at some safe driving practices. A couple of studies have actually been done with lights and sirens versus no lights and sirens. With lights and sirens, you're going to make it to the hospital about 30 seconds sooner than if you used no lights and sirens. The risk increases for the providers because, let's face it, people are stupid and nobody pays attention. So as you're trying to weave in and out of traffic and get people to pull over, that increases the likelihood that your ambulance is going to get in a collision. All to save 30 seconds. So really, if you think about it, the most stable your patient can be is dead. It doesn't get worse than that. So if your patient is that stable, there's really no reason to be trying to weave in and out of traffic and go through red lights and pass school buses and things like that. So what it comes down to is, the speed that you get there isn't really going to save the life. It's the care that you're providing the patient in the back of the truck. Good care is going to save the patient's life. In the response phase, we really aren't able to make the decision of whether or not we want to activate lights and sirens. If it comes in as a 911 call, we have to respond. However, we can make the decision once we have assessed the patient as to whether or not we need to use lights and sirens. There are also times that the call will get EMD'd and the dispatcher will tell us that it's a cold response, meaning no lights and sirens. A good assumption to make is that nobody around you has heard your siren. So you want to drive defensively, you want to drive cautiously. You want to try to maintain a safe following distance from the vehicle in front of you, and also try to avoid being tailgated from behind. Once you start getting driving the vehicle and getting used to it, you'll know where the blind spots are. There are 3 blind spots, generally speaking, around the ambulance. The first one is the rear view mirror, which creates a blind spot in front of the driver. The rear of the vehicle can't be seen fully through the mirror, and then the sides of the vehicle. So to try to decrease the blind spots, you want to lean forward and scan your mirrors frequently for any new hazards. And if you're backing the vehicle, you need to use a spotter when you're backing up. Excessive speed is unnecessary and it's dangerous to both the providers and the patient. It makes it really hard for your partner to provide care to the patient in the back. And it also increases the time and distance that's needed to stop the ambulance. Siren syndrome is a real thing. It actually causes the driver to drive faster in the presence of the siren because of increased anxiety. The siren signifies a request for drivers to yield the right of way, but drivers don't always do that. If you take into account the vehicle's size and the length, these are critical factors when you're maneuvering, driving, and parking the emergency vehicle. The vans, not so much. They're only a little bit longer than a regular cargo van. But once you start looking at the Type 3 vehicles, the boxes, they're wider and longer. So when you're stopping, you have to take into consideration the vehicle's size and the weight, because that's going to increase braking and stopping distances. Ambulances are bigger and they're heavier, so they're going to have a longer braking time and a stopping distance. And the weight in the ambulance is very unevenly distributed, so that makes it more prone to rolling over. When we talk about hydroplaning, at a speed of greater than 30 miles per hour, a tire may lift off the road as water piles up under it, and then it may feel like the vehicle's floating. If you realize that you're hydroplaning, you want to try to gradually slow the vehicle without jamming on the brakes. Although emergency vehicle drivers are exempt from normal vehicle operations during a call, there are certain laws and regulations that must be followed. For example, an ambulance that is responding is never allowed to pass a school bus that stopped to load or unload children. The ambulance has to wait until the driver folds in the stop sign and physically waves the ambulance through. So you are allowed to park or stand in an illegal location. You can proceed through a red light or a stop sign after you come to a complete stop and clear the intersection. You can drive faster than the posted speed limit. You can drive against the flow of traffic, and you can travel left of center to make an illegal pass. Now, keep in mind, all this has to be done while operating the vehicle, keeping in mind the life, safety, and the property of others.
Excuse me? Does that, does the rule with the school bus, does that have any like wiggle room if the patient's like highest of high priorities, or would you still have to?
State motor vehicle statutes will grant an emergency vehicle the right to disregard the rules of the road when responding to an emergency. In doing so, the operator of the emergency vehicle must not endanger people or property under any circumstances. If you have a police escort, you want to follow that escort at a safe distance. At intersections with an escort, it gets a little bit tricky. It's a hazard. Intersection crash is the most common and usually the most serious type of collision in which an ambulance is involved. So traffic may stop for that escort vehicle. They may yield for the police car, give them the right of way. And as the ambulance is approaching the intersection and proceeding after coming to a complete stop, motorists might not expect a second vehicle. So you want to be alert and careful when you're approaching an intersection. In a school zone, it is unlawful for an emergency vehicle to exceed the speed limit in a school zone, regardless of the condition of the patient. So as long as you're in that school zone and the sign is flashing 20 miles per hour, the ambulance needs to travel at a speed 20 miles per hour or less. All the technology that's in the front of the ambulance is actually a distraction. It's kind of hard to minimize the distractions from the GPS because we need that to get where we're going. We are listening to the company radio. We're also listening to the fire radio, and they're asking for updates. So it's difficult to keep your full attention on the road when you're trying to update fire or you're trying to update communications. Suggestion is that the EMT that's sitting in the passenger seat is responsible for radio communications and giving directions. So the driver just has to concentrate on driving. If you're tired, let your partner know. If you're too tired to drive, let your partner know that. You should be placed out of service for the remainder of the shift or until the fatigue has passed and you feel that you're capable of operating the vehicle safely again. If you feel that you're not able to safely operate the vehicle, maybe you can switch with your partner and your partner can drive and you can tech. Next, we're going to briefly discuss air medical operations. Two types of air ambulances. There's a fixed wing. These are generally used to transfer patients from one hospital to another, greater than 200 miles away. And then there's the the rotary wing aircraft, which is the helicopter. So if we take MedFlight, for example, they have a specially trained crew that goes up in the chopper with the patient. And then MedFlight will land and EMTs will provide ground transport for the crew and the patient to the destination hospital. Boston Medical Center is a great example. Their helipad is across the street. So if MedFlight is going to land at Boston Medical, they touch down on the helipad. The ambulance waits. They put the crew and the patient in the ambulance, and then they drive them across the street to Boston Medical Center's ER. It's 0.2 miles. So there are specific circumstances where you would call for MedFlight. If the transport time to the hospital by ground is too long, given the patient's condition, if the patient requires advanced care beyond the scope of EMTs and paramedics, or if the patient needs to go to a specialty facility. So if the patient has a time-dependent injury or illness, if they've had a stroke, a heart attack, or spinal cord injury, scuba diving, near drowning, or wilderness accidents, trauma patients, and anyone who might be a candidate for a limb replantation, a burn center, or a hyperbaric chamber. To get in touch with MedFlight, you're going to communicate that through the dispatch center, and then dispatch will try to arrange that. Once MedFlight is in the air, you can actually you'll be able to contact CMed, and they'll give you a direct radio channel assignment, so you can communicate directly with the MedFlight crew after the request has been initiated. It's not the responsibility of the EMTs to establish the landing zone, but you do need to be familiar with the dimensions and the requirements. So you need a hard or grassy level surface between 60 by 60 and 100 by 100 feet. It needs to be clear of any loose debris, any overhead wires. The recommendation now is to mark the landing site using cones or vehicles. We don't want to use people, and we don't want to use flares. Don't want to use caution tape because that can get sucked up into the rotor of the helicopter. Anybody who's non-essential should be moved 100 feet back. Anytime that you are working around or near the helicopter, you want to keep a safe distance away. Stay away from the helicopter and only go where the pilot or the crew member directs you. Keep a safe distance from the aircraft whenever it's on the ground and hot, which means the helicopter blades are spinning. If you're asked to enter the landing zone, stay away from the tail rotor. The tips of its blades move so rapidly that they're invisible. Always approach the helicopter from the front, even if it's not running, and then approach only after the pilot or the flight crew member signals that it's clear to do so. When you approach, you want to enter only the area between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock positions. When you approach the aircraft, you want to walk in a crouched position. We're approaching crouched because the main rotor blades can dip to as low as 4 feet off the ground. They don't turn off the rotors because the chopper's going to take off again. The chopper takes off and lands into the wind. So the blades, the main rotors, are still going to be spinning. So again, don't approach the helicopter unless you're instructed and accompanied by the crew. Make sure that all of your patient care equipment and the patient are properly secured to the stretcher. Some helicopters will load the patient from the side, and others will load the patient from the rear. You're not going to be landing the chopper, so you don't have to worry about the hand signals. Some more common sense things. In a night landing, you don't want to shine a spotlight in the air to help the pilot. All you're going to do is blind them because they're wearing night vision goggles. So don't shine any lights in the pilot's eyes or toward the helicopter. Another piece of common sense information, If the helicopter has landed on a hill, you want to approach the helicopter from the downhill side. There are some instances where MedFlight won't fly. If it's too rainy, if it's too cloudy, if it's too hot, if it's too cold. Helicopters are limited to flying below 10,000 feet above sea level. They go pretty fast, between 130 to 150 miles per hour. Because of the weight restrictions and the cabin's confined space, if the patient is over 250 pounds, MedFlight's probably not going to fly them. There's a lot of pre-planning that goes into a MedFlight call or a medevac call. Communications is going to be asking you a lot of questions so they can pass that information on to the medevac dispatcher, and that's pretty much how the decision is made, if they're going to accept the mission or if they're going to deny the mission. A lot of the things that we talked about in this chapter are pretty much common sense things. In our service area, we don't really do a lot with MedFlight, but once you start moving north of this area up toward Newburyport, they do use MedFlight a little bit more. The AJ Anna Jakes Hospital up in Newburyport, when it's appropriate, they will call for MedFlight to transfer a patient into the city. So this is all I have for you guys today. You'll be back here in Malden this afternoon. So you guys enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you this afternoon.
Thank you.